Outside Buckingham Palace, London carried on as it always does, tourists with cameras, taxis cutting through traffic, the distant wail of sirens blending into the city's endless hum. No royal procession blocked the streets. No flags were raised at half-mast or full. No press corps gathered at the iron gates, hungry for a story that would sell newspapers for a week. But inside those walls, behind the velvet curtains, beneath the oil-painted portraits of monarchs long turned to dust, something was breaking apart. It began quietly, the way all true storms begin. A phone rang in a private study. A door closed, not slammed, not forced, just closed, with the particular finality of someone who has no intention of reopening it. And then a king's voice, cold and unmistakable, speaking words that would send the entire royal household into a silence, so complete you could hear the centuries creaking in floorboards. Laura Lopes thought she had won. She thought the jewelry was hers. She was wrong. Laura Lopes had never been the difficult one. Among Camilla Parker Bowles's children, Tom with his cookbooks and his easy public warmth, Laura with her quieter life in the Cotswolds, her art gallery, her careful distance from the machinery of royal publicity, Laura had always played her role perfectly. She attended the events she was required to attend. She smiled at the right moments. She kept her opinions to herself and her ambitions even more carefully hidden. She was, by every account, careful, but careful people have limits. And somewhere behind that composed exterior, behind the polished public appearances and the gracious nods at state dinners, Laura Lopes had been watching, waiting, calculating. The inquiry began subtly. A conversation here, a question there, the kind of gentle, probing questions that sound innocent on the surface but carry weight underneath. Who currently holds a collection? Where is it stored? Have any formal decisions been made about its future? Not through lawyers at first, not through public statements or formal claims, through whispers, the kind that travel fast in royal circles. The questions move through the quiet channels that exist in every great household. The assistants, the advisors, the trusted staff who hear everything and say very little. And they reach the right ears. Or rather, from Laura's perspective, the wrong ears. They reach the ears of people who report directly to King Charles III. The collection Laura Lopes had set her eyes on was never meant to be seen by the public. Not every royal treasure sits behind bulletproof glass in the Tower of London. Some pieces, the most personal ones, the ones soaked in family memory, live in private rooms, in locked drawers, in houses that don't appear on any tourist map. This collection had been assembled quietly over decades. Some pieces came from estate sales, purchased discreetly with no press release and no fanfare. Some were gifts, personal gifts, given in moments of love or loyalty or farewell. Each one chosen with intention. Each one carrying a story that its original owner never wrote down. Because some stories in royal families are never written down on purpose. The woman at the center of this collection had understood something that few royals ever truly accept. That objects outlive people. That a brooch passed from one hand to another carries the fingerprints of everyone who ever wore it. That jewelry, in a family like this one, is never just decoration. It is documentation. It is proof of who was loved, who was trusted, who was chosen, and that, more than the diamonds, more than the gold, more than any price a Sotheby's auctioneer could place on it, was exactly why Laura Lopes wanted it. Because if she could hold those pieces, she could make a claim, not a legal one, not yet, something more powerful than legality, a claim of belonging. To understand why this jewelry mattered so much, and why King Charles responded with such absolute finality, you have to go back further than last year, further than the coronation, further even than the years when Charles and Camilla finally stood side by side at the altar and made their union official before the world. You have to go back to the quiet years, the hidden years. There was a woman, older, respected, the kind of royal figure who never sought the spotlight, but always commanded a room simply by entering it. She had watched the family change over decades, watched marriages form and fracture, watched children grow into adults who sometimes disappointed her and sometimes made her prouder than she could express. And she had watched Camilla. She had not always approved. That much was known within the family's inner circle. The road between Camilla Parker Bowles and acceptance inside the monarchy had been long, complicated, and painful for everyone involved. There were years of silence, years of careful distance. But something shifted. It shifted slowly, the way seasons shift, not in a single dramatic moment, but in accumulation, small gestures, quiet conversations, a loyalty demonstrated not through grand declarations, but through consistent, steady presence. And this woman, this quiet, watchful, deeply principled woman, had eventually made a decision. She gathered certain pieces from her personal collection, not the official pieces tied to formal royal duties, the personal ones, the ones given to her in moments of genuine human connection rather than ceremonial obligation, and she designated them, not through a formal will, not through palace lawyers or signed documents bearing royal seals, through something older than paperwork, through trust. She trusted that the right people would understand, that when she was gone, the weight of that trust would be felt, that the pieces would find their way to the hands that deserved them, not the hands that were loudest or most persistent or most connected to power, the hands that had earned them. For years after she passed, the collection sat quietly, respectfully, waiting, until Laura Lopes decided that waiting was no longer something she was willing to do. Kings do not shout. They do not slam doors or make scenes in crowded hallways. Their power moves differently, quietly, precisely, like a chess piece placed on a board with absolute certainty. When King Charles decided to respond to Laura Lopes, he did not raise his voice. He didn't need to. What he did was far more final than anger. Charles had been here before. Not in this exact situation, not with this exact collection, this exact person, this exact moment of family tension. But he had been in the space where a decision had to be made, where the comfortable option and the correct option were not the same thing, where choosing kindness in the short term would create chaos in the long term. He had learned, across decades of public life and private grief, that certain things cannot be left ambiguous. Ambiguity in a royal family is not neutral. It is an invitation. It is a gap that someone will always rush to fill with their own interpretation, their own narrative, their own version of events that serves their own interests. Charles had watched ambiguity destroy things he loved. He was not going to let it happen here, so he picked up the phone himself. Sources close to the palace described the conversation as brief and absolute. There was no negotiation, no second meeting scheduled, no olive branch extended. The king made his position clear. The collection had a designated purpose. That purpose had been established through trust, through relationship, through years of quiet understanding between people who were no longer alive to speak for themselves. Laura Lopes' inquiries, however gently made, had crossed a line, and the line was now being redrawn. Firmly, finally. But here is what made this moment truly significant. Charles did not act out of anger. Those close to him are careful to emphasize this. This was not a king lashing out at an inconvenient stepdaughter. This was a king acting as a guardian, a protector, not of wealth, not of property, but of meaning. Because the real threat Laura Lopes represented was not financial. It was narrative. If she succeeded in repositioning herself as a legitimate heir to this collection, even informally, even just in the whispers of family conversations, it would rewrite a story about loyalty and love and quiet devotion that deserved to be told correctly. And Charles, perhaps more than anyone alive in that family, understood the cost of stories told incorrectly. He had watched his own story be told incorrectly for decades. He had watched people he loved be reduced to villains in narratives built by others. He had watched truth get buried under the weight of more dramatic, more convenient versions of events. So when he saw the same pattern beginning to form around this collection, he acted, not with fury, with finality. The door, as one source described it, was not slammed. It was simply and permanently closed. Closing a door is one thing. Making sure it stays closed is another challenge entirely. Within days of the king's communication, something shifted. Laura Lopes had sought counsel, not family counsel, not the gentle conversation of relatives working through a disagreement over dinner. She had reached outward, toward people who understood not just family dynamics but legal architecture, the specific, complicated, centuries-deep legal architecture that governs how property and inheritance function within and around the British monarchy. And what her advisors discovered was not nothing. There existed what legal historians who specialize in royal estate matters describe as a relational clause, not a formal legal instrument in the modern sense, but a documented understanding, recorded in correspondence between the original keeper of the collection and her closest confidants, that used language suggesting collections should remain connected to those who maintain genuine, ongoing relationship with the core royal household. The language was old, imprecise by modern legal standards, but it was there, and Laura Lopes' team believed it created enough ambiguity to warrant a formal conversation, the kind that involves documents and signatures, and people in expensive suits sitting across tables from each other. King Charles's response revealed something important about how he operates. He did not panic. He did not immediately escalate to public statements or dramatic legal countermaneuvers. Instead, he went to the archives. The royal household maintains records the public will likely never see: private correspondence, personal diaries, documented conversations between family members going back generations. Within those archives, Charles and his most trusted advisors began building something methodical and thorough, a counter-narrative grounded entirely in documented fact. They found letters, multiple letters, written by the same woman whose trust had established the collection's purpose. Letters that went far beyond the vague relational language Laura's team had identified. Letters that named names, that described specific relationships, that articulated, with the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who has thought deeply about their legacy, exactly what she had intended. And not once in any letter, in any document, in any recorded conversation, did the name Laura Lopes appear. Not once. But another name appeared repeatedly, a name connected not to ambition or inheritance strategy, but to genuine, documented, years-long devotion to the values the collection represented. Charles now had what he needed. Not just a closed door, but a locked one, with documented evidence of who held the key and why. Laura Lopes' legal team had found an ambiguity. Charles had found the answer to it. There are moments in royal history that happen in plain sight, yet nobody understands what they are witnessing until much later. A brooch worn to a specific engagement, a gesture made at exactly the right moment, a presence at an event that sends a message no press release ever could. What happened next was one of those moments, and it was perfectly orchestrated. On a gray Tuesday morning, at a royal engagement that had been on the official calendar for weeks, the statement was made. She moved through the crowd with the particular confidence of someone who knows exactly why they are there, not nervous energy, not careful performance, but something quieter, something older. The brooch she wore had not been seen in public for years. Royal watchers, the dedicated, encyclopedic community of historians and enthusiasts who catalog every public appearance with extraordinary precision, recognized it within minutes. Social media began moving before the engagement had even concluded. Photographs circulated. Comparisons were drawn. Archived images surfaced, showing the same brooch worn decades earlier by the woman who had assembled the collection, the same woman whose letters Charles had found in the archives. The message was unmistakable to anyone paying attention. This piece, and by extension, the collection it represented, had found its home, not through legal maneuvering, not through family politics or inherited position, but through genuine relationship, through the kind of connection that the original keeper of the collection had always valued above every other consideration. Inside the palace, those who understood the significance exchanged glances. Outside, the press began asking questions, and Laura Lopes, watching from her private life outside the formal royal circle, understood with complete clarity what she was seeing. The collection was not in dispute anymore. It had never truly been in dispute, not in any way that mattered. The relational clause her advisors had found had never been an opening at all. It had been a test, a measure of character, a question posed by a woman long gone to the people she left behind. Who would honor the trust? Who would seek to claim what was not theirs? The answer had just been given publicly, without a single word spoken about Laura Lopes, without a legal statement, without a palace press release, without any of the machinery that royal institutions typically deploy when they need to communicate something difficult. Just a brooch, worn by the right person, at exactly the right moment. Every royal drama has a winner and a loser, but the greatest royal stories are never really about winning. They are about something harder to find and impossible to manufacture. They are about legacy, about what you leave behind when the noise fades and the cameras turn away. The jewelry drama faded from the headlines within weeks. That is the nature of royal stories in the modern age. They arrive with extraordinary force, dominate conversations, generate breathless speculation, and then something else happens. The carousel keeps turning. But inside the palace walls, nothing had faded at all. Something had been decided, permanently, irreversibly. King Charles had done something that went beyond simply shutting down a claim. He had completed an act of guardianship that had begun long before he was king, before the coronation, before the crown, before the weight of the monarchy settled officially onto his shoulders. He had been protecting this trust, quietly and patiently, for years, because Charles understood something profound about legacy that is easy to miss in the drama of royal life. Legacy is not built in grand gestures. It is built in the accumulated weight of small, correct decisions made consistently over time, in the choice to honor a promise even when nobody is watching, in the willingness to absorb discomfort, family tension, legal uncertainty, public speculation, rather than compromise something that deserves to be kept whole. The woman who had assembled that collection had understood this. She had lived it. She had spent decades watching the royal family navigate the collision between public expectation and private truth. She had decided, quietly and deliberately, that the things she left behind would not be reduced to monetary value and stripped of everything that made them meaningful. And so she had not left them to titles or to legal documents. She had left them to relationship, to demonstrated loyalty, to the person who had shown, not in one dramatic moment, but in the patient, consistent accumulation of genuine connection, that they understood what those objects represented. Laura Lopes would continue her life. She would attend events. She would maintain her careful public presence. She would remain Camilla's daughter, existing in that complicated middle space between royal adjacency and civilian life. But she would carry the knowledge of what had happened here, the knowledge that she had reached for something that was not hers, that she had mistaken proximity to power for entitlement to what power protects, that the trust assembled by a woman of genuine principle had recognized the difference, even from beyond the grave, between ambition dressed as belonging and belonging that had been quietly, humbly earned. ## Part 9, the legacy that remains. The jewelry was never really about jewelry. It was about whether the people left behind would prove worthy of what they had been trusted to carry. Charles had proved worthy. And somewhere, in whatever space exists beyond the reach of palace politics and legal clauses, and the relentless turning of the royal news cycle, the woman who had assembled that collection with such care and such intention knew it. Some legacies are written in history books. Some are carved into monuments. And some, the most personal, the most true, the most fiercely protected, are held in velvet cases in private rooms, passed from faithful hand to faithful hand, carrying the weight of everything that was promised and everything that was kept. This was one of those. Not because of the diamonds, not because of the gold, because of the promise, and because of a king who refused to let it break.